Are you planning to send your players into the shadowy depths of the Underdark? If so, you're going to need some monsters for them to fight down there. In this video, you'll learn about 5 creatures that I think would make worthy adversaries for any underground adventuring party. I won't be covering the major civilizations like drow or mindflayers, or creatures like goblins, which you could find above ground just as much as you could find below ground. I want to focus on the sort of creatures that make good standalone encounters while players are just roaming around the depths. I will be presenting these monsters in order CR from the least to the most challenging. As always, if you want to support what I do here on the channel, you can back me over on Patreon. My patrons have access to nearly 2,000 pages of my original homebrew content, including campaign settings, adventures, travel encounters, and a lot more. There's a link to the Tales of Cain Patreon down below this video. Let's start with the Chitin. It's a 4-foot tall humanoid creature with spider-like features. They have usually 4 arms, about 6 eyes, and mandibles around the mouth, and their bodies are covered in a soft grey fur. Originally, Chittins were elves, but then the drow experimented on them and turned them into their slaves. In a fit of hubris, the drow engineered Chittins to serve them first and Lolth, the spider goddess, second. Lolth didn't really appreciate that, and so she empowered the Chittins, giving them the ability to rise up, to free themselves from drow control. Once liberated, the Chittins founded their own colonies, ruled over by Lolth's chosen Chittins, a subspecies called choldriths. While most Chittins are maybe 60% elf and 40% spider, a choldrith is the inverse, more spider than humanoid. Choldriths are Lolth's warrior priests. They cast spells, and they lead larger Chitin forces in battle. But Chittins are physically weak, yet they can be very effective in combat, because they have, among other things, 3 attacks per turn. That gives them quite a high chance of hitting, especially for a pretty low CR creature. This is really good for breaking concentration if you're dealing with spellcasters. Chittins can produce webs from a kind of disgusting aperture in their torso, but they do this really slowly, so this feature won't really come up in combat. But that said, they do have classic spider abilities like Web Sense and Web Walker, which will come up in combat. Respectively, this means that they can know the exact location of any creature touching the same web that they're touching, and they can move through webs without taking any penalties or restrictions to movement. As I've alluded to, Chittins are really low CR. They're 0.5 challenge rating, which I think is the equivalent of like a gnoll or a giant seahorse or something like that. But really, how challenging they are, it comes down to the environment that they're fighting in. And depending where you run them, they can be pretty deadly. Sure, you put them above ground where their sunlight sensitivity kicks in and they're not going to be that great. But run them in a cramped, dark, underground passage where there's no light sources and everything's covered in webs, and it's a very different story. You've got thick webs on the ground and on the walls, and so players are going to have serious movement limitations. The Chittins won't have them, so they can use that to their advantage, running in, attacking, darting away. Then with the web sense and their natural dark vision, they know where all of the players are pretty much all of the time, but any player without dark vision is going to have to keep some kind of light source activated at all times. All told, it makes for quite an interesting, dynamic, and potentially quite tough encounter. Seafood is back on the menu if your players can slay this next monster, the lobster of the Underdark, also known as the cave fisher. Now, there are a few really cool things about the cave fisher. One is that if you have a player at your table who has a bit of an issue with spiders, arachnophobia is a relatively common phobia as these things go, cave fishers actually allow you to enjoy all of the main benefits, mechanically speaking, of a spider in D&D without actually mentioning or describing spiders. Officially, cave fishers are arachnids. But when you talk about them, you're essentially talking about an enormous crustacean, a big white lobster. Despite this, they do have a lot of spider-like qualities in the way they behave. They can climb on walls, they can crawl across the ceiling, and they shoot sticky filaments. Not webs, filaments. I actually really like this feature because once the creature has fired out its filaments and entangled a target, the cave fisher can then retract that sticky thread, pulling the creature, the target, back towards them to land within 5 feet of the cave fisher. It's a really fun way to take ranged attackers and spellcasters and drag them from the back of the fight into the heat of action. Another cool thing about cave fishers is that they're one of the very few creatures that I'm aware of in 5th edition D&D, and maybe more in D&D in general, to have detailed flavor text about harvesting ingredients. You can slay a cave fisher and then basically use all of its body for other purposes. The shell can be used for armor and weapons or even jewelry. Its blood is alcoholic. Dwarves drink it like a spirit, so you can enjoy that or sell it. And the filaments can be woven together to make really strong rope. This is a good moment for me to mention that if you like crafting items from dead monsters, I actually have a full crafting system over on my Patreon, link down below this video. You can get pre-written rule sets for making potions and cooking meals and forging weapons and armor, and it all relies on harvesting elements from the monsters you slay. Cloakers are nasty. These are really big flying creatures that haunt the Underdark. They have great leathery wings and a mournful, terrifying cry. Most adventurers, when first encountering a cloaker, are going to kind of assume that this is a big wild beast, like a giant bird or a giant bat, but cloakers are fully sentient. They're intelligent creatures. They actually speak using deep speech or undercommon, but being chaotic and sadistic creatures, also they don't really speak a lot. They skip the speaking part and they get straight to the slaughtering adventurers part. The important thing about their intelligence is that you can run them in battle as intelligent, cunning, strategic entities. They don't have to be kind of bestial. They've got a lot of interesting abilities. They've got attacks, obviously, but they've also got their Cloaker's Moan, a sort of terrifying sound that frightens enemies who hear it, and they have phantasms. This is an ability that lets them create 3 illusions of themselves, making it much harder for the players to hit them. When the Cloaker attacks with its bite, it can attach itself to a target, potentially suffocating the target and forcing it to share any damage that the Cloaker receives while it's attached. One of the things that I also really like about Cloakers is that the feature they have, which the players are going to find most annoying, which is the phantasms, can kind of be negated with bright light. I really like when monsters have an ability where you can take an action that reduces the effectiveness of the ability. You can kind of turn the ability off halfway through the fight. So a player shoots a fireball or a lightning spell and there's a flash of illumination, and just for a moment the phantasms vanish, hinting to the players that if they could get a sustained light source turned on the monster, those phantasms would no longer be a problem and they would have an easier time targeting the Cloaker itself. Cloakers are cool. Make sure to run them as, smart enemies, not wild animals. They're going to ambush the players, they're going to use the terrain to their advantage, they're going to retreat if they feel that they're losing, and they'll hold a grudge and remember the players for later. 3rd edition also had a powerful kind of Cloaker boss called the Cloaker Lord, so if you could kind of set up a stat block for that, just a very intense Cloaker, maybe a few CR levels up, you could have one of them leading a smaller posse of Cloakers to make it a bit more interesting, make it a bit more of a boss fight. In the uppermost layers of the Underdark, you might encounter a few familiar chromatic dragons. Maybe a red dragon living in a volcanic region, or a blue dragon in some tunnels underneath the desert. But the lower levels of the Underdark become increasingly inhospitable and uncomfortable for a large, flying dragon. If you want to run a really fun draconic encounter in the depths of the Underdark, deep dragons are the way to go. I've included the adult deep dragon here with its CR of 11, but you could go up or down, younger or older if you want an easier or harder encounter for your party. Deep dragons they're uniquely adapted to the Underdark, and they feel completely comfortable in this very strange, claustrophobic environment. Most dragons have a sort of elemental theme to them that shapes them. Red dragons are breathing fire and are fire resistant, white dragons have the same situations with cold damage and so on. But the theme for deep dragons is fungus. The deep dragon's breath weapon is this cone of nightmare-inducing spores. The players breathe them in, and then they have to make a wisdom save to resist taking intense psychic damage and becoming frightened. The weapon does less damage than that of other dragons, but the frightening effect kind of balances out, and it just makes it feel like a nice twist on the usual damage-dealing breath weapon. The adult deep dragon's legendary and lair actions then keep that spore and fungus theme going. It can poison your players, control their minds, it can compel them to fight each other through the mind-controlling spores, and it can cause sludgy moss to grow on the ground and creating areas of difficult terrain. I've complained before, I know, about the fact that dragons in 5th edition D&D all play very similar to each other, and I know that's been slightly improved with the 2024 rules. But one reason that I love deep dragons is that they don't feel like any of the dragons above ground. Especially with the legendary and the lair actions added in, a deep dragon feels like it's been shaped by and adapted to the Underdark. It's something that could only really be found down here. And personality-wise, they're quite interesting. They're obsessed with knowledge, to such an extent that written books and scrolls within 6 miles of a deep dragon's lair cannot be destroyed. I think this creates some interesting story potential as well. Maybe the players are seeking some information, lost in books and scrolls that have been burned and banned by a tyrant who wanted to suppress this information for some reason. Deep dragons keep these huge libraries of parchments and scrolls hidden in their lairs, and these items never degrade or rot over time, so the players might want to fight or sneak past the dragon and claim knowledge instead of gold, once again making this feel a little bit different to your average dragon encounter. One of the classic monsters that you're going to see in a lot of Underdark enemy lists is the purple worm. And don't get me wrong, purple worms are iconic and they're incredibly fun to run, but if you want something that's a little bit more eldritch and a little bit unexpected, I suggest changing things up and running a neothelid instead. Neothelids are the survivors of collapsed mind flayer colonies. Let's say a group of mind flayers are wiped out and their elder brain is destroyed. These colonies always keep a large supply of illithid tadpoles, the tadpoles that appear in Baldur's Gate 3. And these live in a big brine pool. When the colony falls apart, the tadpoles start to eat each other in the brine pool, and eventually only one tadpole remains. It's consumed all of the others, and it's grown to an enormous size, almost rivaling a purple worm. These things can become gargantuan, and once they've finished eating all of the other tadpoles, they go looking for more food. Neothelids have psionic powers and some basic spellcasting, and they can even do a bit of basic mind reading. But first and foremost, these are wild, terrifying beasts, massive, hungry, eldritch horrors. They can spray acid from their mouths, they can swallow players whole, digesting them in enormous acid-filled stomachs. And at CR 13, they're pretty nasty, especially if you throw them up against a slightly underpowered party, maybe around level 9 or 10. My favourite thing about neothelids is their story potential. As I've said, they just keep eating and growing, making them an existential threat to basically every other living creature in the Underdark. No one hates them more than the mind flayers. So you could have this interesting dynamic where the players form a kind of uneasy alliance with some mind flayers, maybe the survivors of the collapsed colony, and they take on this larger threat of the rampaging neothelid. That's where I'll wrap up today's video. I hope it sparked some interesting ideas for maybe encounters or plot lines in the games to come, and perhaps I've been able to highlight a few cool creatures that don't always get as much attention as they deserve. If you want to support what I do here on the channel, as always, it's much appreciated if you head to the link below this video and support me on Patreon, but also just liking, subscribing, and engaging with the channel as a whole is much appreciated. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.